Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Mari. I'm one of the librarians at Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine, and I'm here to finish the case of Windy Lake, a Mighty Muskrat mystery written by Michael Hutchinson and published by Second Story Press. We're going to pick up where we left off with chapter 16, The Day Gets Warmer. Sam knew what he wanted to say, but he was too startled. They're just bringing me supplies so I can stay here for another 4 days. Denise's defiant voice had lost its dry rasp. You kids, get out of here. The company manager was steadily walking towards them. I think we should go, Sam said to Denise. We're leaving right now, sir, he called to Mr. Mikowski. Chickadee stood up. Sam could see that she was angry that Mr. Mikowski didn't care about their older cousin. A team was also fired up. Sam stepped in front of both of them. We haven't left or anything. We're just about to go. We had to check on her. Our grandpa said. You kids again? Where's your uncle? You better be looking for my man, Pixton. Leave them alone, Denise screamed. We don't know where Uncle Levi is, a team shot back at the big man. This one's going to starve here, Mikowski pointed to their cousin. She's almost done. He laughed. You don't care, Chickadee shouted at him. Mr. Mikowski pointed in the direction of the gate. Get out of here! Samuel kept his eye contact with the man as he slowly turned. Goodbye, Denise, he said as he left. Yeah, see you soon, a team said with anger in his voice. Chickadee bent down and gave her cousin a hug. She gave Denise's shoulder a quick squeeze as she stood and gave the manager a fiery look. The Mighty Muskrats walked off, stiff-legged, around the warehouse. That old man might be dead because nobody in this town cares. Mr. Mikowski walked right behind them. We've been figuring out where he is since we heard about him. Sam shot over his shoulder. We care, a team added. We just don't think he's where they're looking. Kids, the company man snorted. We've been all around those snake pits. We're going to push further back into the bush today, if that's what you're talking about. You aren't even looking in the right place, Samuel said out loud. The manager's frown deepened, but he didn't say anything. The group arrived at the fence. Mikowski motioned for his men to get out of the way as he swung the chain-link gate open. When the kids were through, he gave the gate a shove and turned to go back to his office. The nice guard who let them in looked slightly chagrined as the gate clicked closed. I'll keep an eye on her, he whispered with a smile. Chickadee looked back at the warehouse that blocked his view of Denise. Please, take care of her, she said to both the universe and the guard. Turning away, she and the team started walking down the road. Thanks, Sam nodded to the man, and then he followed his brother and cousin. In the rising heat of the spring day, a team took off his jacket as he broke the silence. Where are we going now? Yeah, Chickadee said with a sigh. Wish Otter was here. Sam started pinching his chin. I don't know where we're going. Chickadee sighed. A team kicked a rock. They kept walking down the dusty road. It's after lunch and I didn't have much for breakfast. A team rubbed his belly as he walked. Sam and Chickadee ignored the hint. Okay, maybe we need to look at this whole thing a different way. Sam felt under pressure to find a destination. Who pulled out that rope? Maybe it wasn't Dr. Pixton. Mr. Mackey rented out the boat. Chickadee nodded, interested in Sam's line of thought. I don't know. I'm wondering why we can't find fish. Team swung his head to move his hair so he could see his brother clearly. That old man had been gone for 3 days, 2 nights now. We haven't found fish for the last 2. Sam pinched his chin. His wife said that she was around, Chickadee said. That he was around. She'd lie for him, a team reasoned. Nobody disagreed. Should we go bang on his door again, a team asked. Sam was deep in thought. Mr. Mackey was an old Métis fisherman with an extra boat. He didn't seem like someone who'd do away with an archaeologist. Fish had always seemed harmless, but he did have cousins and a brother who'd been in trouble with the law on more than one occasion. If we go to his door again, maybe we should get Mark. Yeah, good idea, Chickadee nodded vigorously. A team shrugged and flicked his hair out of his eyes, as though he didn't care, but he didn't object to the suggestion of a bodyguard. If we go and get Mark, we'll pass by Grandpa's and see if his guests have arrived, Sam offered. The other two nodded and smiled. With a plan of attack, the 3 Mighty Muskrats hurried into the dark forest that lined the trail to their grandfather's house. As they ran, they thought of Otter and wondered if he'd found anything. When the trio emerged from the bush, they came out onto another dusty white gravel road. Looking down the hill at the houses built along the sloping road, they could see their grandfather's property closest to the shore of Windy Lake. There were unfamiliar vehicles in Grandpa's driveway. With big grins, the brothers and their cousin began to run a little faster. "Grandpa's guests," Chickadee squealed as she tried to keep up with Sam. A team didn't bother to wait and sped off down the hill in a cloud of fast-moving dust. By the time he and his brother and his cousin caught up to him, he was catching his breath in the front yard. They burst into their grandpa's house as one, tripping over themselves as they pushed through the door. The sudden squeak of the old wood and the commotion of the children caused the elders inside to smile. They sat at the table, 2 old men and 2 women having tea with Grandpa. "Here they are," their grandfather said, watching their entry with pride. Otter stood near him. "Otter!" the 3 exclaimed as they saw him. "What did you find out?" Samuel pulled his jacket off eagerly. "Are you okay?" Chickadee asked. "Thanks for leaving me behind," a team scolded with a grin. "We have guests," Grandpa said with mock seriousness. "Introduce yourselves." "Sorry, Grandpa." Chickadee rolled her eyes as she gave Otter a welcoming hug. The Mighty Muskrats lined up near their grandfather. "This one, the girl, is Chickadee." Grandpa pointed at her with his lips. "Hello, I hope your trip was good," Chickadee said to the elders with a smile. "She makes good bannock, and good tea, too," Grandpa told him. "This one," he pointed at Sam, "is Samuel. He's a thinker, but sometimes he thinks too much, eh, Samuel?" Grandpa chuckled at Sam. "Thankfully, I have you to correct me, Grandfather." Sam laughed. He turned to the guests. "I hope you enjoy your stay. This big one is a team. He can lift one of those mid-sized boat motors already. Runs like a deer." Grandpa smiled at the tallest muskrat. A team nodded and grinned at the elders. "And you've already met my boy Otter." Grandpa's pride in Otter was evident. They call them the Mighty Muskrats. He laughed. "Funny, hey?" Grandpa said it like there was a hidden joke that only the elders would know, and after a good chuckle, Grandpa touched Otter on the shoulder. "Tell the other muskrats your news." With a huge smile, Otter announced, "I found who took the rope out of the boat." Chapter 17, Thinking Like a Bird. Otter began studying the land as soon as he pulled up the canoe. Somewhere here there was a clue, if only he could find it. The trampled grass and brush around the snake pit parking lot testified to the search by the RCMP and company men. Oliver hoped any visible clues hadn't been trampled by the workers' big steel-toed boots. Oliver figured it wouldn't be long before they were here again. He knew his grandfather was genuinely concerned that they would find and damage the refuge. Otter hadn't seen it, but if Grandpa thought it was important, then it was important. The morning chill was gone, and the heat of the day was increasing. Winter had held on as long as it could, but spring was rushing in after the storm a few days ago. Otter thought of the hawk and the birds looked skyward. In the distance, hovering over the trees with its steady gaze focused on the ground, the hawk balanced on the wind. If that hawk lived on snakes, Otter thought, he must have been hungry due to the long winter. He hurried over the gravel trail to the snake pits. Eventually, the skinny spruce trees gave way to an opening covered in grass and brush. A few car-sized pits and the limestones were surrounded by a bigger one about the size of a house. These were the snake pits. From the rustling in the grass, Otter knew that a few of the snakes were already awake. A few more days of this heat and the whole area would be slithering with newly aroused reptiles. Carefully, Otter inched towards the edge of the biggest pit. The archaeologist wasn't down there. Suddenly, the hawk screeched. Otter felt the raptor was angry at his intrusion, but continued to study the earth. A ridge of bare limestone was the highest point around, and the hawk hovered over this area. Leaving the snake pits, Otter made his way to the ridge. He watched the grass carefully, making sure not to step on a few of the sluggish snakes that were early risers. Otter stepped onto the limestone and glanced over his shoulder at the lower landscape. His back was to the bush on the edge of the casually groomed area that defined the snake pits as a tourist attraction. Investigating the limestone shelf where he stood, he noticed a clump of something black sticking to the rocks a short distance away. Otter soon realized it was the corpse of a garter snake that had come out of the pits. The snakeskin did not look punctured. Instead, it looked like the snake had burst, its inside forcing their way out. Some of the flesh had been picked over. The hawk screamed. Otter looked up. The raptor hovered tirelessly, committing to watch the earth below. And that's when I knew what the birds knew. Otter paused and smiled at his cousins. What do the birds know? Ateem scratched his head. Chickadee smiled. I know what the birds know. Otter glared at her and then grinned. What do the birds know? He conceded. The birds know that you can kill a snake if you lift it really high and drop it. The birds know you can kill a snake if you lift it really high and drop it, Otter said triumphantly. Sam shook his head. What does that have to do with finding Dr. Pixton? Grandpa laughed. This one can't think like a bird, he said to his friends. The snakes that come out of the pit are mostly black. Otter paused, waiting for his cousin to catch up. The room was quiet as Samuel pinched his chin. Suddenly, understanding brought joy to his face. Just like the shore rope from the rental boat, he said with a big clap of his hands. Yes, Grandpa laughed. The other elders clapped their hands and chuckled with their friend. That's great, Otter. Chickadee slapped her cousin on the back and gave him a hug. Now we can prove who pulled the boat ashore, Sam said to Ateem. Wait, what? What did Otter figure out? Ateem's forehead furrowed with concentration. Tell him, Sam exclaimed. Sheesh, tell him. Otter rolled her eyes. Chickadee rolled her eyes. Otter, not used to being the center of attention, spoke quietly. Well, when I saw the burst snake, I thought it might have been burst because it was dropped, and there was a hawk hovering there hunting. And I didn't see it, but I bet when he does catch a snake, he flies way up and then lets it go. It falls, and then the hawk doesn't have to fight to eat it. It can just pick over the bones. Okay, so Ateem still wasn't getting it. Chickadee hit him on the shoulder. The birds picked up the rope from the boat, Goofy. Ateem thought for a moment and then grinned as the pieces suddenly fell into place. Sam summarized everyone's thought. So the rain on snow event was enough to pick up the boat and get it floating, and then the storm pushed it across the lake, and when the storm stopped, the water went down and left the boat on the delta. Then some bird thought this rope was a snake and picked it up, but he could only get it so far. Being a bird, he couldn't lift the boat. So when he dropped the rope, it was stretched out just like someone had been pulling the boat into shore. Aho, Grandpa said with a big smile. The Mighty Muskrats have solved one again. Chickadee touched Samuel's arm. We have to tell Uncle Levi. Otter laughed. I already did. When? His cousins asked as one. When I was coming back in the canoe, Gus was riding out to the snake pits with the RCMP. He saw me and stopped, and that's when I told him. Way to go, Otter. Ateem slapped him on the shoulder. Otter continued. Gus told the RCMP. They didn't hear what I was saying, even though they were riding right beside Uncle when I told him. So they've changed locations. Grandpa's brow furrowed. As far as I know, I told them about the high water lifting the boat and about the snake. Grandpa grinned. You did it, little one. He gave Otter's shoulder a squeeze. Samuel was excited to get going. Our look on the internet suggested that Dr. Pixton was probably blown from the northeast shore. Grandpa looked at his older guests. So should we get our lazy bones out to look for this old man in the bush? The elders nodded vigorously. We can go tell Charlotte's family, and they'll go out to the cultural camp. One of the lady elders indicated another couple with a point of her lips. They agreed with much nodding and furrowed brows. Their chairs scraped against the wood floor as they stood. Who's taking care of the land? One of the elders asked. Grandpa thought for a moment. Windy Lake is big. There's a lot of land up there. A few families steward that land. Old Relics has a trapping cabin up there. The dog sled race goes right past it. Elder left. Well, if Relic catches him, there's a good chance that we'll just get the doctor's skin back. Don't say that. His wife playfully hit him with her purse. Everyone laughed. So, are there trails out that way? Elder asked as she put on her coat. Well, yeah, there's trails and those lines of surveyors cut back in the old days. The bone digger shouldn't be hard to find if he started out on one of those. Grandpa looked around and took a stock of what was in his pockets, so he didn't leave the house without something he needed. You kids go find Mark and tell him to get a boat ready. Grandpa opened the door and stepped out. His guests followed. With the grown-ups gone, the rest of the Mighty Muskrats gathered around Otter. You did it, cousin. Ateem shook Otter's shoulder. You didn't actually see the hawk lift up the snake? Sam was curious. No, just the burst one on the ground. It was pretty gross, but cool, you know? Otter grinned from ear to ear. I knew you'd figure something out. Chickadee gave him an affectionate shove. So should we go find Dr. Pixton? Otter announced. Let's put this case to bed. Sam punched the air. Chapter 18, Searching Slump. It took a couple hours of preparation before everyone was in the boat, but eventually the Mighty Muskrats stepped onto the northwest shore of Windy Lake in their quest for the archaeologists. As usual, Otter was the first one out of the boat, but he was followed closely by the other muskrats, their older cousin Mark, and their grandfather. Once on shore, Grandfather smiled wearily. He went over the details of this land that he had taught to them long before. This is near where our ancestors used to camp in the winter. The town is sitting on our summer camp. This was closer to the muskrat fields, before the dam was built. You think the bone digger is here, Grandpa? Ateem's voice was strained as he helped Mark pull up the boat. I bet there's a better chance of finding a history thief at the old winter camp than at the snake pits. Mark knelt in the lake to wash the dust off the rope. Shh, Grandpa scolded the oldest cousin. Right now he's just a scared old man. You don't know how the bush can frighten a city person. It's easy to say that you are not afraid of the dark when you can flick on a light. We need to find him. Hey, Uncle Levi, Chick Eddie yelled excitedly. Their uncle waved casually as he stood amongst a group of RCMP officers, volunteers from the community, and company men. They stood at the back of the crowd and listened to the federal officer detail the new search strategy. When it was over, people broke into smaller groups. Half of them got back in their boats and headed towards the Sundance grounds that were further along the shore. Of those left, most of the elders marched off to the nearby winter camp. Some volunteers and company men headed down the few visible trails. Others formed line and started combing the beach along the shore. When the crowd cleared, Grandpa went to Uncle Levi, and the Mighty Muskrats followed. Those people are going to trample all the signs. He pointed at one of the groups combing the bush. We're doing this by the book, Pops, Uncle Levi said seriously. It took Gus and me a while to convince them that the hawk idea was possible. They didn't even tell Mikowski the reason they're changing the search site. Grandpa didn't push his son. He had dealt with by-the-book people before. Where do you want us to go? Sam asked. The other kids nodded enthusiastically. Well, why don't you follow me? Uncle picked up an axe and some gear and slung it over his shoulder. I saved a trail for us to go down. It goes past a few trap lines and 2 or 3 hunting cabins. It's down this way. That's not the way to Relics, Grandpa asked, although he already knew the answer. No, he's over there more. I didn't think you'd want to bump into that old grouch. Not with the muskrats. Grandpa nodded. Sounds good, he said, and started off with a walking stick in his hand. The Mighty Muskrats followed. Back when the dam was first built, teams of surveyors had measured, mapped, and cut great swaths into the bush. Long, straight lines that sliced through the spruce for miles and miles. They became part of the main trail system that had lain on the land since the traditional times. The elders didn't like the newer cuts because they made it easier for the wolves to catch the moose. But now and then they came in handy. Uncle Levi was taking them to an old trapper's trail that ran off one of these. Once they were on the trail, it didn't take long before Grandpa developed a judgment. He's not down here. We're not just going on tracks, Pop. We're going by the book, remember? Levi yelled over his shoulder, not breaking his stride. He was supposed to talk to the people who hunt out there and see if anyone's staying to the cabins. See if they saw anyone out about here. Uh-huh. Grandpa sounded skeptical. The Mighty Muskrats smiled knowingly as they listened to their uncle and grandfather verbally sparring with each other. It was starting to get dark by the time they returned to their starting place. The rest of the searchers were there waiting for further instruction. Uncle Levi went and spoke to the head RCMP officer. Grandpa went to talk to his guests, who had just returned from the old winter camp with the other elders. The Mighty Muskrats and Mark found a quiet place to sit down. Their legs were tired from the long walk. When Uncle Levi returned, he said, "They're sending the volunteers back home. They don't want anyone else getting lost. The doctor will have to spend another night in the bush. Where's Gramps?" The Mighty Muskrat's lip pointed at the group of elders close to the boss. "Come on there," Uncle beckoned. "You guys are going home, too. You did a good day's work." "What's going to happen to that old man, Uncle?" Chickadee's voice was filled with concern. "I don't know." Uncle Levi's tone dipped low. "He's been lucky. Since the storm, the nights have been warm. Tonight's going to be even warmer, and it's too early in the spring for a lot of mosquitoes and black flies. If the doctor is dry and uninjured, there's no reason he couldn't make it for a few more nights out here. Hopefully he has what it takes to survive one more." Before he walked off to speak with the older volunteers, Levi beckoned to Mark. "You might as well get the boat ready." Their older cousin followed Uncle Levi down to the shore. Otter yawned. The other muskrats slowly pulled themselves up off the ground with groans and muttering. After a stretch, Otter stood up and followed them to the boat. Grandpa watched them. Chickadee's shoulders were slumped. Samuel's footsteps were heavy. A team was staring off into space as he walked, and Otter dragged his feet. "I wonder how your cousin Denise is doing," Grandpa said sternly. That thought hit the muskrats' hearts instantly, and they tried to put a little bounce in their step as they hopped into the boat. Chapter 19, 2 Visions Found. The next day, as the team and Samuel arrived at Grandpa's for their morning chores, they came upon Chickadee and Otter, who were already outside cutting kindling. "One of those otter couples stayed overnight, so there's lots of work to do," Otter said, as he sliced off another sliver of wood with the hatchet. "Hurry and come help, lazybones," Chickadee barked. The brothers laughed. "What do you think we came to do?" a team shot back defiantly. The popcorn crackle of a vehicle coming down the gravel road drew everyone's attention. Uncle Levi's police truck came barreling around the corner. It skidded to a stop on the driveway. "Come into the house, kids, good news." The truck's momentum seemed to have been absorbed by their grandfather. By their uncle. Grandpa's door opened with a creak. The elders inside looked up from their tea to see Uncle Levi and the muskrats parade into the kitchen. "They found him," Uncle Levi announced as he took off his cowboy boots. "Yay!" Chickadee and a team yelled. "Ahow!" The elders cheered, raising their teacups. "Where?" Sam asked. Old Relic marched him out of the bush at the end of a shotgun, called him a trespasser. The archaeologist had broken into his cabin. "He's lucky to be alive," Grandpa gulped. "I heard it over the radio." Uncle Levi poured himself a cup of tea and leaned against the counter. "Is he okay?" Sam asked. "They say he's really hungry and cold, but other than that, he's fine. And like a new man, they say." I wasn't sure what they meant. The boys just said he was different somehow. "We must go see Denise," Grandpa suddenly announced. "That's where I'm going now," Uncle Levi said. "They're bringing Dr. Pixton to the company dock." "Well, I think it's time to go check on your cousin. What do you think?" Grandpa smiled mischievously at the Mighty Muskrats. Uncle Levi put his cup down. "I'm leaving now. I can't be seen to have anything to do with you. The company people won't like that." "Don't worry, we can get into trouble all by ourselves," a team boasted. "Sure we can," Grandpa agreed. "I have no doubt," Uncle Levi shot back over his shoulder as he left. "There's a package for your cousin in the fridge," Grandpa told Chickadee. "It'll be good to see her," Chickadee said. "She'll be done with her vision quest today. Let's go see what she learned." Grandpa grabbed his walking stick and headed out through the squeaky door. It didn't take long for the Mighty Muskrats and their grandfather to get to the company decks. They had no trouble getting in. A large crowd made up of the morning's volunteers, the company men, and the police officers had gathered. Everyone waited for the RCMP boat to slide around the point and into view. Grandpa led the children right to Denise. Her perch was at the shore end of the dock the crowd was on. Everyone would have had to walk past her to go down the far end of the pier. "Oh," Chickadee said with both anger and concern. She knelt beside her older cousin. The boys stood around and fidgeted as if they weren't sure how to help, even though they wanted to. "Grandpa!" Denise tried to shout, but the word came out as a dry croak. She was in even worse shape than the day before. Her back looked permanently bent. Her hair hung in dreads with clumps of creosote and tar stuck in it. She made a sorry sight sitting cross-legged, arms wrapped around the rough wooden pillar, hands locked within the metal pipe. A team began to rip open the bag with a water bottle inside, but Grandpa waved him off for a moment. "How are you, granddaughter?" Grandpa held her chin up and looked into her eyes. "I want to go home, Grandpa. I'm tired." Denise looked up for a second and then hung her head, exhausted. "Then all you have to do is let go, my child." Grandpa smiled. "I don't know, Grandpa. Did I accomplish anything?" Denise's lack of energy was dragging down her emotions. "Did you learn anything, granddaughter?" "I met a man from Smoky Bend," Denise explained. After a long pause, she went on. "He's a dad, has 2 lovely girls. He works here. He needs a job. He says he needs the money to give his girls a better life. It makes me wonder if I'm doing the right thing." "You're fighting for what you believe in. That is rarely a bad thing," Grandpa assured her. Well, this is happening everywhere. The land is being sucked up by the cities. Even if I stop it here, there are so many cities. Grandpa shook his head and thought. He remembered a story that would teach without forcing a direction. I once saw a beaver build a dam across a fast-moving river. He held a finger in the air like it was a talking stick. It was too fast for her to make a dam straight across. Any small amount of mud she put in place was swept away. He used his arm to wave the mud further down an imaginary stream. So she found a narrow spot where the river was bent. Grandpa curved his hand to mimic the river's change in flow. There was an eddy there, and she made big half circles of mud and sticks, like a U. She made that small eddy bigger, and slowly adding little branch after little branch, she was able to build a dam across that fast water. Maybe you need to find a narrow place where you can make your dam. Where? Denise had tears in her eyes. A nation's law is supposed to be the will of its people. I think you need to go and speak to their lawmakers. The government? If that's where the lawmakers are, then yes. I see what you mean, Grandpa. So this was all worthless, wasn't it? Denise's sadness was evident. Did you start out doing something you believe in? Yes. Did you hurt anyone? Denise laughed. Just me. Did you learn something? Denise thought. Yes, I did. Once you learned something, did you use that information to come up with a way of better doing what you want to do? I think so. Then this will only be worthless if you do not act on your vision. Grandpa stroked her hair. Denise stared out across the lake and then at the crowd of people waiting for the boat that held the rescued archaeologists. How do we get out of here? Where are the handcuffs keys? Samuel looked at the pipe as though it were a puzzle. Handcuff keys? Denise smiled. I'm just holding my hands together in here. You mean they could have just pulled you off that if they wanted to? I was going to use handcuffs, but I forgot them. Denise looked sheepish. She slid her raw red hands out of the confines of the pipe. Oh, the pins and needles. The exhausted activist spread out her fingers and then made a fist. Wait till you try to stand up, cuz, Sam warned with a smile. Don't laugh at me. Denise tried to raise her voice, but it was too hoarse. She managed to chuckle. Is it over? Is she done? Stephen from Smoky Bend suddenly stuck his head into the group. I'm just getting started, Denise said, but I'm taking the fight to them. As Chickadee helped Denise straighten her legs, her older cousin moaned in pain. Stephen knelt down and rubbed her back. The noise from the crowd further down the dock suddenly rose. The RCMP boat had been spotted. Grandpa? Sam questioned his elder, eager to see and hear what happened. The chatter grew as the sound of the approaching boat was heard. I'll sit with her, Stephen offered. He looked at Denise with concern. Okay, Mighty Muskrats, go see them bring in the bone digger. Denise knew the curiosity that infused her cousin. I'll be okay. The Mighty Muskrats paused until Grandpa nodded his permission. The boys took off down the dock to check out the crowd. Chickadee took her grandfather's hand and pulled him along. The boys stopped outside of the circle. They were unable to see anything. But when Grandpa arrived, the crowd parted in front of him. The kids followed in his wake as he made his way to the front. Uncle Levi and Gus were there. They smiled at the family as they came through the crowd. The muskrats jostled for position in front of the forest of legs. The archaeologists had finally stepped out of the RCMP boat and onto the dock. Dr. Pixton was wrapped in a blanket. His skin was chalk white, and the veins on his hands stood out in blue. The doctor's spine was bowed from the weight of the experiment. All of his energy was being spent shivering. He looked permanently cold. We have to go get him to the ambulance, the RMCP shouted. He has hypothermia. Clear the way, the company manager yelled. Although the officer and Mikowski were in a hurry, the doctor wasn't. He walked at such a glacial pace, refusing to be hurried or be put on a stretcher. I'll make it, he gritted his chattering teeth as he spoke. The news reporter from the Aboriginal People's Television Network appeared out of the crowd and shoved a microphone in Dr. Pitson's face. Doctor, what happened out there? Leave him be. Can't you see he's weak? Mikowski's thick arm tried to sweep the reporter aside. The young native journalist stood her ground and pointed the microphone at the manager. What can you tell us about what happened? Mikowski suddenly realized that he was being taped. He straightened up and changed the tone of his voice. He told us he pulled ashore to go look at the Indians, the people of Windy Lake's old winter camp, but he got lost and never made it back to his boat. Suddenly, the doctor stopped his determined march, and the crowd hushed. I am smart, a small, though old bold nigger told the reporter, looking into her eyes. But you know how big it is out there? The universe, the wheel within the wheels, the circle in the sky. I saw them. The reporter slowly took her arm back. You saw the universe? She looked around at those crowds as she thought to confirm what she had heard right. I was hungry and I was alone. Your people lived here and survived. The archaeologist spoke as though it were a revelation. The reporter looked uncomfortable and said, I'm an Anishinaabe. My people are from down south. What strength! Dr. Pixton looked around at the crowd happily. Mr. Mikowski opened his mouth to say something, stopped, started again, and then shook his head in bewilderment. He touched the doctor's back, urging him to walk on. What will you do now? The reporter probed. Dr. Pixton thought for a moment and laughed weakly. No more field work for me. No more digging up the bones of native people. It's time I met some of the living ones. He reached out and squeezed the reporter's arm in sincerity and then walked to the waiting ambulance. The doctor's change of heart was whispered through the crowd. Eager to hear more, everyone followed the old man as he was helped onto the stretcher. As the ambulance was pulling out of the parking lot, the lead RCMP officer turned towards the crowd and the APTN cameras. I want to thank you for volunteering to look for Dr. Pixton. You were able to bring him home due to your help. The people in the back of the crowd cheered and patted each other. The Mighty Muskrats looked at each other gleefully. Grandpa smiled and tousled Otter's hair. The officer went on. We really want to thank the Windy Lake Police, Levi and Gus, for not only arranging the volunteers, but also giving us the information that helped us change our search location and actually find the doctor. Come up here and say something, Gus. Gus was a funny guy who was used to being the center of attention. I'd like to claim the credit, I really would, he shrugged, but I have to give the credit where it's due. It was the Mighty Muskrats who figured it out. A great "oh-ho" went up from the crowd. The RCMP officer looked a bit chagrined. The Mighty Muskrats were pushed forward right into the center of the circle. Gus smiled back at them and lined them up and patted them on the back. The APTN camera was rolling. Gus spoke to the crowd and the reporter. We thought from the way that we found the boat that someone had pulled it into the mud of the delta, but these kids figured out that that wasn't the way it happened. How did it happen, Otter? Otter shielded his eyes from the camera's bright light. Grandpa told us if we wanted to know the secrets, we'd have to know the delta and what the birds knew. Well, the birds know that if you pick up a snake and drop it, you can kill it. The reporter had no idea what Otter was talking about. She waited expectantly, and he smiled with a feeling of completion. Chickadee pushed Sam forward. And that's how we found the bodies. The boat's rope was pulled out by a hawk and not Dr. Pixton or someone else who stole the boat. We also found on this rain on snow event that followed by the dam opening was just enough to lift the boat. The wind must have naturally pushed it to the other side of the lake. The reporter looked impressed. Denise and Stephen pushed the crowd. Denise had his arm around her waist and was helping her walk. They both smiled when they saw Denise's little cousins. Grandpa proudly watched his grandchildren from the edge of the circle. Sam continued, that's when we figured out a hawk saw the rope. Must have picked it up and tried to pull it high, but of course the boat is really heavy. So the hawk dropped the rope, making it look like someone had pulled it out. Everyone was searching on the wrong side of the lake. The RCMP officer, after hearing the whole story, smiled at the kids. The reporter tightened up the line of the Mighty Muskrats. Sam, Chickadee, and a team, and Otter all hugged each other, grinning uncomfortably. There you have it, folks, the reporter said into the camera. The case of Windy Lake has been solved by these kids called... She motioned to Sam as though he should say the name. Instead, the four sleuths looked at each other, and with wide grins they yelled as one, the Mighty Muskrats. And that is the end of this book, The Case of Windy Lake, by Michael Hutchinson, published by Second Story Press. If you really liked this one, you can request it at our library, come and pick it up, or you can read some of the other ones in the series. Thank you for listening. My name is Sarah Mari, one of the librarians at Portland Public Library, Portland, Maine. Bye.